The city of Velorn, on the fringe planet Teleron 4, was a melting pot of alien species, a sprawling urban landscape built around the lucrative trade of exotic goods, technologies, and resources from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. A combination of spaceports, megamalls, and dense residential districts all melded together under a dome of artificial atmosphere. Here, cultures mixed, but with them came tensions and misunderstandings. It was a place of commerce, but also a place where the unwritten rules of galactic politics often clashed. Sarah Donovan, a human woman in her early 30s, walked through the bustling streets of Velorn's central market, her curious eyes scanning the countless stalls filled with items she had never seen back on Earth. The smell of alien spices, the hum of foreign dialects, and the sheer variety of sights overwhelmed her senses. Teleron 4 was a hub of commerce, but it was also a dangerous place for anyone not native to its towering cities. It was her first time visiting the planet, and she had come alone, much to the dismay of her husband, Marcus. Marcus Donovan was not the type of man to get worried easily. As a decorated war hero and one of the most respected figures in the galaxy, Marcus was a man who had seen it all. He had fought in interstellar battles, negotiated peace treaties with hostile species, and even survived being stranded on a death world for 3 months with nothing but his wits to rely on. But when it came to his wife, Sarah, Marcus was protective to the point of paranoia. "Just stay on the ship," Marcus had said before they landed on Teleron 4. "It's not a safe place for humans, especially in this part of the galaxy. I'll be back in a few hours." But Sarah, always the adventurer, had smiled and waved off his concerns. "I'll be fine, Marcus. I can handle myself. Besides, I want to see what the market has to offer. It's not every day we come to a place like this." And so, despite Marcus's warnings, Sarah had ventured into the heart of the market, her adventurous spirit driving her forward. She wandered from stall to stall, inspecting strange trinkets and devices with wide-eyed fascination. The merchants, many of whom had never seen a human before, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. At one particular stall, Sarah found herself drawn to a piece of alien technology she had never seen before. The device was small, handheld, and emitted a faint glow from its center. It was sleek and elegant, clearly a piece of high-end tech. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands as she tried to figure out its purpose. "That's a Kirshen memory extractor," said the vendor, a wiry Zelkrin with bright red eyes and translucent skin. His voice was raspy, and he spoke Galactic standard with a heavy accent. "Very rare, very valuable. You won't find another one like it in this part of the galaxy." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Memory extractor?" The vendor nodded enthusiastically. Yes. It can pull memories from the brain and store them in a crystal for later viewing. Very useful for preserving knowledge, or how do you say blackmail, yes?" Sarah frowned. "Blackmail?" The vendor chuckled. Just a joke, but it is very useful. You want to buy?" Before Sarah could respond, a large shadow fell over her. She turned to see a tall, imposing figure standing behind her. The alien was nearly 7 feet tall, with blue-green skin and 4 yellow eyes that gleamed with an unmistakable arrogance. His muscular frame was adorned with tribal markings, and his clothes were of a style that suggested he came from one of the Outer Rim worlds, a place where law and order were often decided by brute force. "Move," the alien growled, his voice deep and guttural. Sarah blinked, taken aback by the sudden intrusion. "Excuse me?" The alien sneered, towering over her. "I said move. I want to see that device." Sarah, undeterred, stood her ground. "I was here first. You can wait your turn." The alien's sneer deepened into a scowl. His 4 eyes narrowed as he leaned in closer, his breath hot and rancid. "Humans don't belong here. You should know your place." Sarah's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "And what place is that?" The alien chuckled darkly. "Anywhere but in my way." Without warning, his arm shot out, and before Sarah could react, his fist connected with her side. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, her breath knocked out of her lungs. She fell to the ground, clutching her ribs as pain shot through her body. For a moment, the world around her blurred, and all she could hear was the sound of her own labored breathing. The marketplace went silent. Merchants and customers alike stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. Aliens of all shapes and sizes turned their attention to the confrontation, their eyes widening in shock. It wasn't every day that someone dared to strike a human, especially in a place like Teleron 4, where the galactic elite often mingled with the rougher elements of the universe. The alien looked down at Sarah, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Weak, just like the rest of your kind," he muttered. But then, something changed. The alien's smile faltered as he noticed the crowd around him begin to whisper. It was subtle at first, just murmurs here and there, but then a name began to circulate among the onlookers. Marcus Donovan. The alien's eyes widened, and he turned to the nearest bystander, a slender figure with insect-like features. "What did you say?" The bystander hesitated, clearly nervous. That's Marcus Donovan's wife." The color drained from the alien's face, his arrogance evaporating in an instant. He looked down at Sarah, who was slowly getting back to her feet, her face twisted in pain but her eyes burning with fury. His mind raced as he tried to process what he had just done. Marcus Donovan. The name alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of even the most hardened criminals and warlords. Stories of Marcus's exploits were legendary across the galaxy. He was a man who had fought in some of the bloodiest battles of the Human-Drakian War, a man who had personally taken down entire pirate fleets, and a man who was known to have no mercy when it came to those who harmed his loved ones. The alien swallowed hard, his bravado completely gone. I didn't know," he stammered, backing away from Sarah. "I didn't know she was Donovan's wife." But it was too late. The marketplace had fallen into a tense silence, and the alien could feel the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. He had made a grave error, one that could very well cost him his life. Chapter 2. The Reputation. The silence in the marketplace was deafening. The bustling noise of bartering merchants, shouting hawkers, and curious tourists had all but evaporated in the aftermath of the alien's punch. Every eye was on Sarah Donovan, who was still on the ground, clutching her side, trying to catch her breath. She grimaced, a wave of pain surging through her, but even as she stood up slowly, there was an undeniable fire in her eyes. She wasn't just Marcus Donovan's wife, she was a warrior in her own right, and she would never allow herself to be cowed by some alien thug. Around her, the tension was palpable. The aliens who had gathered around whispered among themselves, passing hushed rumors and stories about Marcus Donovan, the legendary human warrior who had a reputation that stretched across galaxies. The name Donovan carried weight in every corner of the known universe, and for good reason. One of the nearby vendors, a small, rodent-like creature with bright red eyes and a hunched back, sidled up to the alien who had struck Sarah. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" the vendor hissed, his whiskers twitching nervously. "That's her, the wife of the most dangerous human in the galaxy." The blue-green alien's 4 yellow eyes darted nervously as he realized the gravity of his mistake. I didn't know," he stammered, still backing away from Sarah as if expecting her to lash out at him at any moment. "You didn't know," the vendor repeated incredulously. "You fool. That human, her husband, is Marcus Donovan, the man who destroyed the entire Krasian fleet single-handedly, the same man who walked into the Dorger Empire's capital and made their emperor kneel before him. And you dash," the vendor looked the alien up and down with disgust, "you just punched his wife." The alien's skin, already a pale shade of blue-green, seemed to drain of color. His arrogance and confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Marcus Donovan was not someone you wanted as an enemy. The stories of his vengeance were legendary. There was the tale of how he had decimated a pirate fleet that had kidnapped one of his crew members, leaving no survivors. And then there was the infamous battle on Velshire 4, where Marcus had turned the tide of an entire planetary invasion by sheer force of will, outsmarting and outgunning the enemy at every turn. But perhaps the most frightening stories were the ones that spoke of his ruthlessness when it came to those who harmed his family. One story, in particular, stood out among the rest. It was said that when a Drakian warlord had taken Sarah hostage during the Human-Drakian War, Marcus had gone on a rampage, slaughtering the warlord's entire fleet before rescuing her. And then, when the warlord begged for mercy, Marcus had looked him in the eye and said, "There is no mercy for those who hurt the ones I love." The warlord had been vaporized moments later, leaving nothing but ash. The alien, now fully aware of the depth of his mistake, began to sweat profusely. His hands trembled as he looked around, praying that Marcus wasn't anywhere nearby. He knew that if Donovan found out what he had done, there would be no escape. "Listen," the alien said, his voice shaking as he turned to Sarah. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to dash. But before he could finish, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. The whispers died down, and every head turned in the same direction, their gazes fixed on a single figure making his way toward the scene. It was Marcus Donovan. He was a tall man, his black hair streaked with silver at the temples, and his chiseled features bore the marks of a life spent in battle. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, scanned the marketplace with a calm intensity that sent a chill down the spine of everyone who looked at him. He was dressed in simple clothing, black pants, and a dark jacket, but even without armor, he radiated an aura of authority and danger. Strapped to his side was a sidearm, a weapon that most people recognized as one of the most advanced pieces of human military tech ever created. Marcus walked through the marketplace with purpose, his eyes locking onto Sarah, who had managed to stand up but still looked pained. His expression darkened as he saw the bruising on her side, and the crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide berth around him. No one dared to meet his gaze directly. The alien, upon seeing Marcus, froze. His throat went dry, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to back away, but his legs felt like jelly. I didn't know, he blurted out, his voice shaky and desperate. I didn't know she was your wife. Marcus didn't respond at first. He stepped up to Sarah, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? He asked quietly, his voice low but filled with restrained fury. Sarah winced but nodded. I'll be fine, she replied, trying to downplay the pain. She knew that Marcus could be overprotective, and while she appreciated it, she didn't want him to make a scene. It's just a bruise. Nothing I can't handle. Marcus's gaze flicked from Sarah to the alien, who was now visibly shaking. His expression, once filled with concern for his wife, darkened into something far more menacing. He stared at the alien for what felt like an eternity, his silence more terrifying than any words could have been. You hit her, Marcus said, his voice calm but cold as ice. The alien swallowed hard, nodding frantically. I am sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize she was your dash. You hit her, Marcus repeated, his tone even colder. He took a step forward, and the alien took a step back. The difference in their size was obvious. Marcus was smaller, leaner, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind who held the power in this situation. The alien was now trembling. He had heard the stories about Marcus Donovan, and now, face to face with the man, those stories seemed all too real. The crowd around them held its collective breath, watching with wide eyes as the legendary human stared down the alien who had dared to harm his wife. I didn't mean to dash, the alien started, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You didn't mean to what? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. You didn't mean to assault an innocent woman? Or you didn't mean to get caught? The alien opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was trapped, cornered by a man who was known for his ruthlessness, and there was no way out. All he could do was stammer incoherently, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to survive the next few moments. Marcus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You've made a mistake, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. And now you're going to pay for it. The alien's eyes widened in terror. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The only sound that came out was a desperate, choked whimper as he realized just how badly he had miscalculated. And then, just when it seemed like Marcus was about to strike, Sarah placed a hand on his arm. Marcus, don't, she said softly, her voice breaking through the tension. He's not worth it. Marcus hesitated, his eyes still locked on the alien, but after a moment, he exhaled slowly and nodded. You're right, he said, his voice calming slightly. He's not. The alien, still trembling, let out a shaky breath, relieved that he wasn't about to meet his end at the hands of the most dangerous man in the galaxy. But Marcus wasn't done. He leaned in close, his voice so quiet that only the alien could hear him. If I ever see you again, Marcus whispered, his tone like a blade slicing through the air, you won't get a second chance. The alien nodded frantically, backing away as fast as his legs would allow. He disappeared into the crowd, his heart racing as he fled, knowing that he had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. Marcus turned back to Sarah, his expression softening as he gently took her hand. Let's get you back to the ship, he said quietly. I'm not letting you out of my sight again. Chapter 3. A Debt to Pay. The alien who had struck Sarah Donovan fled into the crowd, trembling and drenched in cold sweat. His heart raced, pounding against his chest like the drums of war he had once marched to as a soldier on his homeworld. His hands, still shaking from the encounter, tried to wipe away the beads of sweat that dotted his blue-green forehead. He was a Zilron warrior, brutal, feared, a veteran of a dozen planetary campaigns, and yet, in this moment, he felt utterly small. Around him, the market slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Alien vendors resumed their shouted bargains, and the crowd moved as though the confrontation had never occurred. Yet, something had shifted in the atmosphere. Whispers followed the alien as he hastily disappeared between the crowded stalls. Some pointed fingers, others shook their heads knowingly. Everyone knew what had happened, and more importantly, everyone knew who had just entered the market. Marcus Donovan. The alien couldn't stop thinking about that name, even as he pushed his way through the crowds, desperate to find somewhere to hide, somewhere far away from the wrath he knew was coming. He had been foolish, arrogant. What was a human woman doing in a place like this? How could he have known? But it didn't matter now. The damage was done. I hit his wife, he muttered under his breath, the realization sinking in deeper with each step. I hit Marcus Donovan's wife. He cursed his own ignorance. On most planets in this sector, humans were still seen as weaklings, fragile creatures barely scraping by in the grand scheme of the galaxy's political and military powers. But not Marcus Donovan. No. The name Marcus Donovan struck fear into the hearts of even the most hardened warlords, the most dangerous mercenaries, and the most ruthless criminals. The Zilron had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But he had never imagined he would come face to face with the man himself. His mind raced through the stories he had heard over the years. There was the tale of how Marcus had once faced down an entire pirate fleet single-handedly after they had taken a civilian ship hostage, destroying every last one of their vessels with ruthless precision. And then there was the infamous incident on Velos Prime, where a group of rebel warlords had attempted to ambush Marcus during peace negotiations. He had left the warlords broken, humiliated, and their armies disbanded without firing a single shot. His tactical brilliance was unmatched, his reputation for cold, calculated revenge legendary. But the stories that struck the most fear were the ones about what Marcus did when his family was involved. There was a widely circulated rumor that, during the final days of the Human-Drakian War, a Drakian general had kidnapped Sarah Donovan, attempting to use her as leverage. The Drakians had expected Marcus to negotiate, to be willing to bend. Instead, Marcus had led an all-out assault on the Drakian flagship, tearing through their defenses with an almost inhuman fury. He had personally slaughtered the general in cold blood, and when the rest of the Drakian high command begged for mercy, Marcus had given them none. The war ended with their unconditional surrender, and Marcus had walked away with his wife, leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. The Zilron swallowed hard as he remembered that tale. Was this what awaited him? Was Marcus going to track him down and make him pay in blood for the single, foolish punch he had thrown? He ducked into a dark alleyway, his mind spinning as he tried to formulate a plan. He needed to get off Teleron 4, fast. But how? The spaceports would be watched. The moment Marcus put out word of the incident, every bounty hunter and mercenary on the planet would be looking for him, hoping to collect a reward or earn favor with the human war hero. There was no escaping it. No running from Marcus Donovan. He could try to hide, lay low until the heat died down, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. Marcus wasn't the type to forget. The Zilron had crossed a line, and he would pay for it one way or another. But there had to be something he could do, some way to make this right, to avoid the inevitable wrath. His mind raced as he considered his options. He could beg for mercy. He could throw himself at Marcus's feet and plead for his life. But would that be enough? Would Marcus even listen? From everything he had heard, Marcus was not the forgiving type, especially when it came to his wife. The Zilron had never met Sarah Donovan before today, but he had heard whispers about her too, a strong, intelligent woman who was just as fearless as her husband. She was known to accompany him on many of his missions, often acting as his most trusted advisor. The Zilron cursed himself again. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance that he hadn't even considered the consequences of his actions. Now, it was too late. His fate was sealed. As he leaned against the cold stone wall of the alleyway, he heard footsteps approaching. His heart leaped into his throat, his pulse quickening. For a moment, he thought it might be Marcus, come to deliver his retribution. But when the figure stepped into the dim light, the Zilron's panic turned to confusion. It was Varric Carr. Varric was a well-known figure on Teleron 4, a high-ranking official within the Galactic Trade Consortium. His influence stretched far and wide, and he was known for his cunning, his ruthlessness, and his ability to get things done no matter the cost. He was the kind of man who always had his finger on the pulse of galactic politics and economics, and the Zilron had crossed paths with him before, though not in any meaningful way. "What are you doing here?" the Zilron asked, his voice shaking with fear and confusion. Varric smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down the Zilron's spine. "I heard about your little incident with Marcus Donovan's wife," he said, his voice smooth and measured. The Zilron's throat tightened. "I didn't know she was his wife," he muttered, as if saying it out loud would somehow change the situation. Varric nodded slowly, as if considering the words. "No, I imagine you didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that you made a very dangerous mistake." The Zilron felt his legs weaken, and he slumped against the wall. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Marcus is going to kill me." Varric's smile widened slightly. "Perhaps," he said, "but there may be a way to mitigate the damage." The Zilron's eyes widened with a flicker of hope. "What do you mean?" Varric stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back in a manner that suggested complete control of the situation. "You see, I have certain connections. Marcus Donovan is a powerful man, but even he has his limitations. There are ways to navigate these situations if you have the right allies." The Zilron looked up at Varric, desperate for any lifeline. "What do I need to do?" Varric's smile was like that of a predator circling its prey. "It's simple. I can arrange for you to be off-planet by the end of the day. You'll be given a new identity, new credentials. No one will ever find you. But in return, you'll owe me a favor. And trust me, when the time comes, you'll know what that favor is." The Zilron hesitated. He knew Varric's reputation. Nothing came without a price, and the price Varric demanded was often steep. But what choice did he have? He could either accept Varric's offer and live, or face the wrath of Marcus Donovan and almost certainly die. "All right," the Zilron said, his voice trembling. "I'll do it." Varric nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'll make the arrangements. But remember, once you're off this planet, you're mine. Do not forget that." The Zilron nodded frantically, too terrified to argue. Varric turned and began to walk away, his long coat billowing behind him as he disappeared into the shadows. The Zilron felt a wave of relief wash over him, though it was tainted with the bitter knowledge that he had just made a deal with the devil. But for now, at least, he had bought himself some time. As the Zilron prepared to leave Teleron 4, Marcus Donovan continued his search for the alien who had dared lay a hand on his wife. But the galaxy was vast, and even for someone as formidable as Marcus, it would take time to track him down. For now, the Zilron had escaped, but he knew, deep down, that Marcus would never stop hunting him. And when the day of reckoning came, there would be no place in the galaxy where he could hide. Chapter 4. The Price of Mistakes. The freighter that carried the Zilron alien hurtled through space, leaving Teleron 4 far behind. The stars outside the viewport streaked past as the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, and for the first time in hours, the Zilron allowed himself to relax, sinking into the cold, metal seat of the cargo hold. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his racing heart. He was off the planet. Varric Carr had come through, just as he had promised. The bribes had been paid, the false identity had been secured, and now, he was supposedly a free man. But no matter how much distance the ship put between him and Teleron 4, the fear did not fully leave him. His hands were still shaking, his nerves on edge. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting Marcus Donovan to suddenly materialize behind him, ready to exact his revenge. The cargo hold was mostly empty, save for a few crates of supplies destined for a distant colony. The freighter's crew, a ragtag bunch of alien mercenaries, kept to themselves, unaware of their passengers' true identity. The Zilron had taken Varric's advice and paid handsomely for a transport out of the system under a false name. He had never imagined that his life would take this turn. One foolish punch, one act of arrogance, and now he was running, hiding like a fugitive. He closed his eyes, but the memory of what had happened in the marketplace played over and over in his mind. The moment he had struck Sarah Donovan, the shock on her face, and then the whispers of the crowd. Marcus Donovan's wife. The weight of those words had nearly crushed him in that instant. And then when Marcus himself had appeared, it was as if the entire world had frozen around him. He could still feel the terror that had gripped him when Marcus stared at him, those cold, blue eyes boring into his soul. "I hit his wife," he muttered to himself, still in disbelief at his own stupidity. "I hit Marcus Donovan's wife." The Zilron wasn't a coward. He had fought in battles, seen death up close, and killed many enemies in his time. But Marcus Donovan was different. The stories about him were legendary stories of how he had taken down entire fleets single-handedly, how he had outsmarted warlords and tyrants, and most importantly, how he had never shown mercy to those who crossed him, especially when it came to his family. The Zilron had thought about it long and hard during his frantic escape from the marketplace. He had considered running straight into the arms of the Teleron 4 authorities, hoping that they might offer him protection, but he quickly dismissed that idea. No one on that planet or anywhere else in the galaxy, for that matter, would dare cross Marcus Donovan to protect a mere alien who had struck his wife. The only chance he had of surviving was to disappear, to leave the system entirely, to become someone else. That's where Varric Carr had come in. Varric Carr, the shadowy figure who held immense power within the Galactic Trade Consortium, had found him in his darkest moment. He had appeared like a phantom in the alleyway, offering a lifeline. But the Zilron knew that Varric's help didn't come without a price. Varric had promised him safe passage off the planet, a new identity, and a way to escape Marcus's wrath. In return, the Zilron now owed Varric a debt, one that would be called upon when the time was right. Varric's reputation was almost as feared as Marcus Donovan's, though in a very different way. While Marcus ruled through brute strength and fearlessness, Varric ruled through manipulation and cunning. He had ties to every major criminal syndicate in the galaxy, and his network of spies and informants was unmatched. The Zilron knew that by accepting Varric's help, he had traded one danger for another. He had escaped Marcus Donovan, for now, but Varric would come calling sooner or later. As the freighter sped through space, the Zilron felt a sudden jolt of anxiety in his chest. He had made it off Teleron 4, but had he truly escaped? Could anyone really escape Marcus Donovan? Meanwhile, back on Teleron 4, Marcus stood with Sarah at the entrance of the spaceport, his eyes fixed on the horizon as ships lifted off and descended in the distance. His expression was calm, almost emotionless, but Sarah knew better. She could feel the tension radiating off of him. She placed a hand on his arm, trying to ease his mind. "I'm fine, Marcus," she said softly, though her bruised side still ached. "You don't have to go after him." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His jaw was clenched, his eyes scanning the departing ships as if trying to determine which one the Zilron was aboard. "You're not fine," Marcus finally said, his voice low. "He hurt you. He's going to pay for that." Sarah sighed. "He's probably halfway across the galaxy by now. Varric Carr won't let him stay here. He'll be gone before you can track him down." Marcus's eyes narrowed at the mention of Varric's name. "Varric Carr," he muttered under his breath, his voice filled with contempt. "Of course." Sarah squeezed his arm. "You don't need to do this, Marcus. I know you want to protect me, but we don't need to get involved in Varric's games." Marcus turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. "It's not just about protecting you, Sarah. It's about sending a message. I can't let people think that they can get away with hurting you or anyone close to me." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and concern. She knew Marcus's sense of duty ran deep, and his reputation wasn't something he took lightly. But she also knew that going after the Zilron would pull them into a web of intrigue and danger, one that involved not just the alien who had struck her but also Varric Carr. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I know what you're thinking, but sometimes it's okay to let things go. You've won. He's gone. He's not a threat anymore." Marcus frowned, clearly conflicted. "It's not that simple." "It is," Sarah insisted, stepping closer to him. "We've fought our battles, and we've won. We don't need to get tangled up in Varric's world. He'll use this as leverage against you. You know that." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his eyes softening as he looked at her. He had always respected Sarah's wisdom, and more often than not, she was the voice of reason in his life. But the thought of letting the Zilron go, of allowing someone who had hurt her to escape unpunished, gnawed at him. Still, Sarah was right. Varric Carr was not a man to be underestimated. If Marcus pursued this, he wouldn't just be dealing with one foolish alien, he'd be wading into Varric's territory, and Varric was a master of manipulation. There was no telling what traps awaited him if he chose to go down that path. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said finally. "I'll let it go. For now." Sarah smiled, relieved that he was willing to back down. She knew how hard it was for him to do that, especially when it came to something as personal as this. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "But if he ever shows his face again—" "He won't," Sarah assured him. "He's too scared of you to ever come back." Marcus smirked, a small, humorless smile. "Good." They turned and began to walk back toward their ship, leaving the spaceport behind. As they did, Marcus couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unfinished business. He had let the Zilron go this time, but deep down, he knew that people like that always found a way to crawl back into the shadows. Far across the galaxy, aboard the freighter, the Zilron sat in the darkness of the cargo hold, trying to convince himself that he had escaped. He had a new identity, a new life waiting for him on some backwater planet, and with Varric Carr's help, no one would find him. But even as the ship sped farther away from Teleron 4, the fear remained. Marcus Donovan was still out there, and no matter how far the Zilron ran, he knew, deep down, that he would never truly be free. One day, Marcus would come for him, and when that day came, there would be no escape.